There's something about those early mornings on the farm that always felt sacred to me. The kind where the world hasn't fully woken up yet. The air crisp and heavy with the promise of a new day. Birds just starting their tentative songs from the branches of the old maple tree David planted the year we got married. And I'd step out onto the creaky porch boards we sanded together, coffee steaming in my favorite chipped mug, inhaling that earthy scent of soil and growth that grounded me through the hardest times. But that particular morning, as the first light crept over the horizon, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds, I froze mid-sip because the 5-acre spread stretching out before me, the one that had been our everything, looked wrong, horribly wrong. The rows of vegetables that should have been vibrant and reaching for the sun now slumped in defeat, leaves curled tight like clenched fists, stems drooping as if burdened by invisible weights, the tomatoes we'd babbied through spring frosts hanging limp and lifeless, peppers wilting at the edges, zucchini vines sprawled across the dirt like they'd given up the fight overnight, and the soil, that rich, loamy earth we'd enriched with compost from our own kitchen scraps, cracked open in desperate fissures, dry as bone dust under my boots as I hurried down the path, heart pounding with a growing dread that this wasn't a natural drought, not with the steady rains we'd had. This was something sinister, something done in the shadows while we slept. And when I reached the irrigation line, twisting the faucet with frantic hope, nothing came, not a drop, the pressure reading flat at 0, no hiss, no life-giving flow, just silence, accusatory and complete. That land wasn't just property to me. It was the last tangible piece of David, the man who'd laughed his way through our wedding vows, who'd held my hand during endless doctor visits when the diagnosis came, who'd insisted we plant even on his worst days because life keeps growing, honey, no matter what. And after he slipped away 3 years ago, leaving me and our daughter Ava to piece together a world without him, this farm became our heartbeat. The crops we harvested and sold at the weekend stands providing the income that kept the lights on, paid for Ava's piano lessons she clung to like a lifeline, covered the vet bills for the old dog he'd rescued. And more than that, it was our sanctuary, where I'd whisper to him in the wind, rustling the corn stalks, where Ava would bury her small hands in the dirt and smile for the first time in days, turning grief into something green and alive. But now, staring at the dying garden, I felt that old pain resurface, sharp and unrelenting, twisting into a righteous anger that burned away the numbness, because whoever had done this hadn't just cut off water, they'd attacked our memories, our survival, our family, and I wouldn't let it stand, not without a fight. I traced the lines back to the main valve at the property's edge, flashlight from the truck cutting through the lingering shadows. And there it was, the smoking gun, a shiny new padlock clamped tight around the handle, heavy and official looking, with a tag fluttering in the breeze, marked with the seal of the Evergreen Hills Homeowners Association, signed in bold ink by Sylvia Grant, the chairwoman who'd always carried herself like royalty at local events. And next to it, imprinted in the soft mud, fresh footprints, not the rough tread of a utility worker, but something sleeker, perhaps dress shoes pressing deliberately, no signs of haste or hesitation. This wasn't scheduled maintenance, as they might claim. This was premeditated assault, designed to strangle the life out of our garden slowly, painfully, giving us time to watch it fade. And as I knelt there, fingers brushing the cold metal, a storm of emotions swirled inside. Betrayal at the sneakiness of it, fury at the entitlement, but also a steely resolve forming, because this was war declared on a widow and her child, and they had no idea who they were messing with. I didn't waste another minute, climbing back into the truck with dirt still clinging to my knees, driving straight to the association's pristine office in the center of Evergreen Hill subdivision, the gated enclave that had sprouted up around our farm like invasive weeds over the years. Houses all uniform and spotless, not a blade of grass out of place. And when I stormed in, Sylvia was behind her polished desk, surrounded by framed awards for community beautification, looking up with that condescending arch of her eyebrow, as if my presence was an unwelcome interruption. And I laid into her, voice trembling but firm, demanding answers for the shut-off, for the dying crops, for the cruelty of it all. But she just leaned back, folding her arms, delivering her defense with the smug assurance of someone used to getting her way. "This is simply a compliance procedure, Mrs. Ellis. Your farming operations fail to meet our aesthetic guidelines. Agriculture doesn't fit the upscale residential vibe we're fostering here. We've initiated a 60-day review during which services may be temporarily restricted. 60 days that were a death knell for the harvest, for our finances, for everything." And as she droned on about curb appeal and harmonious living, treating my livelihood like an unsightly blemish to be erased, I saw the truth in her eyes, the disdain for anything that didn't conform to her vision of perfection. And in that moment, the realization hit like a thunderclap. This wasn't an error or oversight. This was deliberate conflict, a battle they'd started thinking I'd fold. But oh, how wrong they were, because the quiet ones, the ones who've lost everything once, have nothing left to fear. I drove home with the windows down, letting the rush of air cool the heat rising in my cheeks, mind racing through old memories from my days in the city's planning and zoning office, where I'd spent a decade navigating the labyrinth of land rights and regulations, learning that power like the associations wasn't absolute. It had limits, loopholes, vulnerabilities if you knew where to look. So instead of screaming or rushing to a lawyer who'd drain what little savings we had, I chose patience. Strategy, heading straight to the attic where dust-covered boxes held the farm's history, pulling out deeds, maps, old agreements inked long before the subdivision existed. And as Ava did her homework at the kitchen table below, I spread the papers across the floor, highlighter in hand, coffee refills keeping me going through the night, until there it was, the critical strike, buried in the fine print of an easement grant from 2009. The main road slicing through evergreen hills, the one every resident depended on for access, deliveries, emergencies, wasn't owned by them outright. It crossed our land as a conditional right-of-way, revocable if they violated terms like non-interference with adjacent agricultural use, including water infrastructure. And the irony of it almost made me laugh, a bitter, triumphant sound echoing in the empty attic, because they'd built their gated paradise on our property's backbone, and by locking that valve, they'd handed me the key to lock them out. I didn't announce it, didn't give them the satisfaction of a heads-up. Instead, I called the local welder who'd fixed our equipment for years, ordering a solid iron gate, tall and impenetrable, with reinforced hinges and a lock that could withstand a battering ram, and had signs made, bold letters on metal declaring private property, easement revoked due to breach, no trespassing. And over the next day, with Ava helping mix concrete for the posts, her questions about why we were building for bringing a moment of levity amid the tension, we installed it right at the boundary, sealing off the road legally, completely, and as the padlock clicked shut, I stepped back, heart thumping with a mix of anxiety and empowerment, knowing this would flip the script, turn the oppressor into the oppressed, all for the love of our home, our family, our lost David, who would have grinned at the cleverness of it. The fallout was immediate, almost comical in its chaos. Trucks piling up by morning as vendors for the association's fancy Verdant Valley Vendor Fair couldn't get through, deliveries of mulch and pool chemicals idling in confusion, residents honking frantically, late for work or school, and the calls flooded my phone, panicked voices pleading, then demanding, but I held firm, explaining the breach calmly each time. And by noon Sylvia was there, face redder than the tomatoes she'd doomed, banging on the gate, shouting about unlawful blockade and community disruption. But I met her from my side, documents in hand, voice steady. "You cut off my water without notice, breached the easement. So until it's restored, the road stays closed." And watching her storm off, tires spinning gravel, I felt the power shift, the victim becoming the one holding the reins. But beneath the satisfaction lurked the stress, wondering how dirty they'd play next. They didn't hold back, letters from lawyers arriving like clockwork, full of threats and jargon, drones buzzing overhead in illegal surveillance, capturing footage of our parched fields while violating privacy laws. One even startling Ava as she fed the chickens, her wide eyes asking if we were safe, and I hugged her tight, assuring her we were, but inside the pressure built. Nights spent reviewing old recordings from association meetings I'd attended incognito, whispers caught on tape about starving out the holdouts to enhance property values, damning proof of their tactics. And when Sylvia showed up unannounced one evening, voice laced with false sweetness turning to intimidation, "Open this now, or face the consequences," I recorded every word, heart racing, suppressing the explosion bubbling up, instead sending the files to local reporters, city officials, the zoning board, and the media storm erupted. Headlines blaring, HOA tyranny, widow's farm fights back, interviews rolling in, neighbors whispering support, a board insider cracking under pressure with leaked emails confirming the plot, and as fines mounted for their violations, daily penalties for water code breaches, infrastructure mismanagement. The tension crested, my days a whirlwind of calls and strategy, Ava and I sharing quiet laughs over the absurdity of drones spying on zucchinis. But the core was raw, the injustice fueling every move, the love for our land pushing us through the peak of the storm. The air inside the Evergreen Hills Community Clubhouse that night felt thick enough to cut with a knife, every folding chair filled, and then some, people standing shoulder to shoulder along the walls, along the back, even spilling out into the hallway where the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like nervous insects. And I walked in last, Ava holding my hand so tight her knuckles turned white, both of us in our cleanest jeans and flannel, because this wasn't just a meeting, this was the reckoning we'd been building toward for weeks. The room humming with a low, electric murmur, whispers of, "Did you see the news clip? And they really cut her water?" floating from every corner. And when Sylvia stepped to the podium, her usual power suit looking just a little less crisp, her hair not quite as perfectly set, I could see the strain in her shoulders. The way her smile faltered when she scanned the crowd and realized the tide had turned, that the faces she once commanded now looked back with something harder, something fed up, and as she cleared her throat, tried to launch into her standard speech about preserving community standards and temporary measures for the greater good, the interruption started soft at first, a hand raised here, a quiet "excuse me" there, but then louder, bolder, residents standing up one after another, sharing stories they'd kept bottled for years. The single mom fined for a child's swing set that clashed with the pallet, the elderly couple threatened over a vegetable patch in their backyard, the young family who moved here for the open feel only to watch open space disappear under more identical houses. And with each testimony, the room grew warmer, the air charged with the kind of collective anger that had been simmering too long. And when someone played back one of the audio clips I'd shared, Sylvia's own voice crackling through the speakers saying, "We need to star them out until they sell." A hush fell, then a wave of gasps, then boos, and I watched her face drain of color, her hands gripping the podium so hard the wood creaked, her composure cracking like the dry soil in my fields. The vote came faster than anyone expected. The motion to immediately restore water services, terminate the compliance review, issue a formal written apology to our family, and amend the covenants to explicitly protect legacy agricultural properties, all of it passing with a show of hands that left no doubt, eyes thundering through the room while the nays were scattered and weak, and Sylvia stood there, frozen for a long beat, then slowly reached for the pen, her signature on the resolution. Shaky, ink smudging where her fingers trembled, and when the gavel fell, the room erupted, not in polite applause but in raw, relieved cheers, people hugging strangers, tears streaming down faces I'd never seen cry before, Ava jumping into my arms with a squeal that cut through the noise. And as we walked out into the cool night air, the weight that had pressed on my chest for months finally lifting, I looked back at the clubhouse lights glowing behind us and felt something close to closure. Not perfect, not without scars, but real, earned, the kind that comes when justice finally remembers to show up. Water came back the very next morning, a glorious, roaring rush through the pipes that made the whole house vibrate, and Ava and I ran outside barefoot, laughing as the sprinklers sputtered to life one by one. Mist rising in shimmering arcs under the early sun, rainbows dancing in the droplets, the sound of it like music, like breathing again after holding your breath too long. And though not every plant survived, some roots too far gone, some leaves too brittle to recover. Enough did, stubborn. Green shoots pushing up through the cracked earth, tomatoes beginning to plump again, peppers unfurling new leaves, the corn straightening its stalks as if remembering how to stand tall, and watching Ava kneel in the mud, fingers gently brushing a surviving seedling, whispering, "They're going to be okay." I felt David there with us, in the warmth of the sun, in the stubborn life refusing to quit, in the way our daughter carried on the legacy he'd started, turning what could have been the end into a beginning for the next generation. Sylvia resigned the following week. No dramatic farewell, just a curt email to the board and a for sale sign appearing on her manicured lawn almost overnight. The house sold quickly to a family who actually liked gardens, and the new association board, a mix of longtime residents and a few fresh faces, rewrote the covenants with surprising speed, carving out protections for existing farms, removing the vague aesthetic incompatibility clauses that have been weapons for so long, turning what had been a battleground into something closer to community, people stopping by with baskets for tomatoes, kids from the subdivision coming over to learn how to plant seeds, Ava teaching them with the patience she'd inherited from her dad, and our farm slowly became the heart of the place again. Not an eyesore to be erased, but a living reminder that beauty comes in many forms, that soil and sweat have value beyond curb appeal. The iron gate still stands at the boundary, sturdy and unapologetic, but now it stays open most days, a small hand-painted sign Ava added swinging gently beside the legal notices, "Open for harvest, closed to tyranny." And every time I walk past it, unlocking in the morning, closing it only when the sun dips low, I feel a quiet satisfaction, not gloating, but the deep contentment of knowing we'd fought for what was ours, for the memories woven into every row, for the future we refused to let be stolen. And as I stand in the fields at dusk, watching Ava chase fireflies among the corn, the earth soft and damp under my feet again, I talk to David the way I always have, telling him we made it, that the land remembered who loved it, that sometimes the greatest strength comes from having lost so much you no longer fear the fight. And in those moments, with the sprinklers whispering their steady song, I know peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the presence of justice finally kept. But now, as the stars come out over the revived rows and the neighborhood lights flicker on in the distance, I can't help turning the question outward to anyone listening, to you. What do you think, really? Was locking that gate true justice, the only language power understands when it refuses to listen? Or did it cross into something colder, something that mirrored the cruelty we fought against? When a system built on rules abuses those rules to crush the vulnerable, does matching force with force redeem the moral ground, or erode it just a little? And in the name of protecting family, memory, the very soil under your feet, how much retribution is righteous before it becomes revenge? Because the water flows again, the crops rise, our home endures, but those questions, they linger like morning mist over the fields, quiet, persistent, waiting for each of us to decide where the line truly lies.